Welcome back, everybody, to Crash Out Comics, a true comic book podcast. We got some feedback in the last episode. People were talking about the fact that things were getting a little heated, so we wanted to address that really quick, saying that this podcast is called Crash Out Comics. The whole goal of this podcast was to just take the conversations we have about comic books in our own personal lives and put that into a comic book podcast format. The thing is, we love each other. We are all very good friends. Sometimes we'll be glazing each other, sometimes we'll be loving each other, and sometimes we're going to be yelling at each other because we're just that passionate about our opinions. I know that we never really prefaced this at the beginning, so I just want to say this right now. Any type of like discourse or kind of arguments that you hear, it's all in good spirits. We're not like angry at each other. It's part of the gimmick, but it also is who we are, right? Like we're able as friends to have these conversations and then come back around towards the end and find the common ground. So this is Crash Out Comics. Get ready as we talk about all things comic books and inevitably have a little bit of a crash out.
My name is David, also known as the Omnibus God.
I'm Yuhu, aka Yuhu Comic Review.
I'm Brendan, also known as Decent XP.
And I'm Chris, otherwise known as Chris L.
We appreciate the amount of support that we've been getting. It's awesome that people are even tolerating us. So we appreciate every single person that's been watching the videos, sharing the videos, liking the videos, and listening on Spotify and Apple Music. All of you guys are wonderful, and we hope to continue to entertain you guys. Today we're going to be talking about teams. We kind of a teams-centric theme here. And so the breakdown is we're going to be talking about our favorite team book, and then we're going to talk about another massive, impactful team, and that is the X-Men. We all got together and read Hoxpox, House of X, Powers of 10 by Jonathan Hickman. But the first topic, talking about our favorite team book. So there's a bunch of great teams in Marvel, in DC, and along with that, there's great runs throughout multiple decades. So Chris, what is your favorite team comic series?
My favorite team comic book series is probably Mark Waid and Mike Wieringo's Fantastic Four. It's a run from the early 2000s that kind of reestablishes the team after they had been away for a little bit of time. You see them go to really crazy depths. They go to hell, the negative zone. You see them meet their creator, like God. And there's an incredible Doctor Doom story in there. There's cool stuff with Franklin and Valeria and even Galactus. Like, it's really just a treasure trove of stories and incredible character moments for this really beautiful team.
I haven't read the Waid run, but I've heard nothing but good things. I have the Omni, and I really want to read it because it's one of those books that just is always getting brought up when it comes to like definitive Fantastic Four runs, the best Fantastic Four runs, and
Easily.
like the best for new readers. Why don't you talk a little bit about like that new reader aspect? Do you feel like would you say it's like a new reader friendly book?
Oh, for sure. When the book opens up, you kind of see this boardroom meeting talking about how the Fantastic Four can market themselves. They like reiterate the origin to you on a TV monitor, kind of how they do in the new movie. And then there's a beautiful moment where Reed is putting Valeria to bed and he reiterates the story to her. And it's a good moment for new readers to kind of see the origins of the Fantastic Four, their place in the Marvel universe at that time, and then also Mr. Fantastic's perspective on it, because it is a pretty big thing that happened to them, but he doesn't have exactly the most positive perception of it.
One thing I know about this book, like I also haven't read it, and it's kind of piqued my interest just because I've seen a lot of people talk about it. You mentioned earlier they meet God. I know that's like one of the most talked about moments in not only that book, but in like Fantastic Four history, because if I'm not mistaken, God is the one and only Jack Kirby.
What?
Yes,
I didn't know that. Spoiler.
Nah, that's not a spoiler. Like, they don't call him Jack Kirby or anything, but it is a really, really beautiful moment where they meet him. Like, Sue even remarks, she says, like, Reed, why am I taller than the Almighty? And it's like Jack hunched over at his desk and he's drawing and he's like, oh, like, the universe isn't as bad. Like, the universe isn't as bad. You can fix anything if you try hard enough and you hope enough, He like takes his pencil and erases a scar that Mr. Fantastic has on his face. He redraw it. Like, it's cool.
Yeah, I definitely need to tap into it. And like the artwork by Mike Wieringo, which R.I.P. It looks like exactly what a Fantastic Four book should look like. Like,
oh yeah.
With, like the family dynamic, like fun adventures, and it's like it even has like iconic imagery that like I feel like a lot of people could think, even if they don't know it's from that run. Like I just always think of like that image. Funny enough, it's always something like this when it comes to the Fantastic Four, but it's the four of them together, and it's just like them walking. But you can see Mike Wieringo's artwork because of how impactful it is. I definitely, damn, that sounds really good. I need to tap into that book.
If I'm not
Maybe-
mistaken, I've also heard that there was some editorial problems with that series specifically, where Mark Waid wrote the beginning of the series, and then something happened behind the scenes. I can't remember the specifics of it, and then he left the series for a little bit, and then he came back and kind of like tied up the series. So it was one of those weird things where like he started, he left, and someone else was writing it, and then he came back and kind of like tied it all back up.
That's really cool. I didn't know that.
Is this the run that's like right before? No, I'm stupid. The run before Hickman was Millar, the greatest Fantastic Four writer of all time. Was this the run before that? Do we think? Is that how
I think so. Yeah.
So it's kind of crazy how like a Fantastic Four like evolved into like what eventually became Hickman. And again, obviously Millar does the greatest work ever because it's Mark Millar and he's top 5 writer all time, right? We all agree.
Chris, I actually had a question for you. So it sounds a lot like Waid really kind of leaned into the fantastic aspect or element of the Fantastic Four. And I was also curious about how does Waid handle the, I guess, like the familial relationships between those 4 characters? Because I find that in other works that, because I haven't read this run, but in other works that I've read by Waid, he's really good at like handling those interpersonal relationships, giving each character a unique voice that stands out, and it helps really define them in a run.
I would say that he's like really, really good at it. I would say that that's probably the thing that is at the forefront of his mind when he's writing this book. Like you can tell that he wants to get across that they're a real family. They care about each other and they'll lay down their lives for each other.
I don't know. Mark Waid is kind of an enigma because I feel like when you think of Waid, he's like, maybe I'm not cooking here. Actually, I was about to say like Waid, when you think of him, like kind of surface level, he's kind of like a really like happy-go-lucky writer. Like he kind of writes like, I don't know, like really like happy stories, but then he writes something like Kingdom Come. But then I think about it and I'm like, I guess Kingdom Come is like probably Wade's most serious book. I don't know.
I mean, I don't think so because he did another series called Irredeemable. I wasn't for Marvel or DC,
right.
but I think that was like kind of the whole evil Superman thing before. I don't know if it was before or after The Boys, but I've heard a lot about that series. I need to check it out. I think Mark Waid can tap into the darkness a little bit. Like his Daredevil run compared to like a Bendis is definitely not as tonally crazy, but it has a lot of swashbuckling fun in it. But I still think there's some like super serious moments. I don't want to spoil anything, but like things happen to certain characters, life events happen. There's a lot of darkness there, especially when it just comes to like the morbidity and kind of just uncertainty of life. And I think Mark Waid obviously is a guy that just has a lot of love for like the silver and golden age of comics, and I think he tries to reflect that love in a lot of his works. And even Kingdom Come, right? That's a book that is reflective of his love for the golden age of comics. And so that's why it comes across as dark to us, because it's this like criticism of, contemporary comic book times, but it's still hearkening back to the kind of hope he loved growing up. And I think that's kind of like what maybe you're trying to get at, where like, he has a lot of love and appreciation for these kind of like more vibrant stories, but then he still is able to blend the contemporary and bring it back down to earth when he needs to, which is really cool. I respect Mark Waid. He's a little bit of a workhorse, so he just has so many books coming out at any given moment, and I think that might be his biggest problem, is that we're a little diluted when it comes to Mark Waid works. It's hard to like parse through everything, and because like not everything's going to be a hit. And so I think at this point, maybe it's a little oversaturated in the Mark Waid front, but shout out his Fantastic Four. I know they were Marvel's first family, but there was another group that came from back then in the 60s who was also created by Stan Lee and Jack Kirby that created this group. And I think Brendan picked that specific group, not that creative team. But what do you got, Brendan? Tell us.
Yeah, so my pick for favorite team book has got to be Claremont's X-Men. I just, when I think about what is a definitive team, I think of X-Men. Then I think about what is a definitive run or I guess take on that team. I think Claremont. There's a reason why there are people who will skip the Stan Lee era and just start with Claremont's giant size X-Men. You know what I mean? And I think you get a lot from that. You get a team who's more than just a team; they're also a family, which is an aspect that I really enjoy, and it's also one of the aspects I enjoy the most about the Fantastic Four. And also, like, we get dynamics of characters from very different walks of life. You just did like a really good video about this, like kind of harkening back on like the backgrounds of these characters. So you have Storm, who's from Kenya, Logan, also known as Wolverine, from Canada. You have Nightcrawler from Germany, Peter, also known as Colossus, from Russia, Thunderbird, who's an Apache Native American, and you also have you have Cyclops. So you just have like this wide range of backgrounds, that especially in the times of those comics are coming out, those backgrounds weren't necessarily seen mixed together. And yet somehow you end up with a team who's more than just a team. They have like this familiar relationship, like this connection. So you end up with this group of people who have like a very diverse background. You wouldn't normally see them all together, especially in the times where those comics were releasing. And they also just have like, at first, there's like varying, I guess, mixes of personalities. You have Logan and you have Cyclops, right? Those personalities, those kind of clash a little bit. But over time, what you end up with is really like a familial bond. They go from butting heads as just like kind of frenemies to like brothers. And I think a run that's able to do that, to take a bunch of people from different backgrounds or walks of life and make them kind of merge together into this perfect like symphony, is something that I will always think of when it comes to my favorite teams, or team book. Claremont handled that beautifully.
If you had to, it's such a long run. It's like one of the longest comic runs ever, right? At least for Marvel.
Yeah.
If you had to pinpoint it, like what's, I guess, arc, era, whatever, that really stands out to you, you think?
I would say the one that to me is like the most iconic out of the run is the Days of Future Past section. Also the Phoenix Saga is phenomenal. Like that stands out. Like there's definitely, I guess, like a build up there. Claremont starts to build momentum, and there is that point where you can tell that Claremont's kind of come home with these characters. He's comfortable with them. He knows what he's doing, and that's at that point. You have Days of Future Past. You have the Phoenix Saga. If you're collecting it in Omni format, I'd say that the first Omni is like is Claremont kind of getting a feel for these characters and where he wants to place them in this familial dynamic, like the teams, and then 2 and 3. That's where it's like, okay, we've got this dynamic set in stone. Like we know exactly what we want with these characters and how they relate to each other. But now we're going to help to define these characters more individually. And that's where you get things like Storm becoming the leader of the X-Men, having to grapple with losing her powers, getting that sick ass fucking haircut, So I think, but yeah, to answer your question, I would say the Days of Future Past, Phoenix Saga, like those are the ones that stand out the most for me.
That's crazy. I want to hear some of you who's takes too, because I know he's currently going through that reading journey. But like, I feel like a lot of people say, like you brought up the Omnis, which I like, obviously. And like, I feel like people are always talking about that, like Omni Volume 2, like, oh, this is where things heat up. I haven't read it in a while, so like I definitely need to do a reread.
Right.
But when I read the Claremont stuff early on, I've only gotten to like Volume 3, I think. Volume 1 was my favorite. Like Volume 1 is like a 5-star. All those issues, like issue, what is it, like 1 whatever to 1 whatever, like where it ends with the, I think it ends with the what's it called? I think it ends with the Hellfire Club. So it's kind of like a cliffhanger going into Omni Volume 2. But like Volume 1 is so dope to me. I love like the more episodic feel of it, like how it's just like X-Men adventure, and then it ends, and the next issue, like an issue will end on a cliffhanger, but the problem is still ultimately solved there, like in that issue. So then the next issue is just the X-Men getting out of whatever problem they had at the end of the last issue.
Right.
But then they just go home, and then it's a new adventure.
It's really funny you mentioned that, because like you said, I've been reading a lot of Chris Claremont's X-Men. I'm about to start the prelude to Mutant Massacre stuff. I've read well over 100 issues of Claremont at this point, and I definitely agree with Brendan. I think like Omni 2 is probably my favorite so far, especially just because of like Dark Phoenix Saga, Days of Future Past. I think that's where the team dynamic really gets set in stone. But kind of to spitball off of what you were saying, where the X-Men get in an adventure and then they deal with the ramifications of the next adventure. I was watching an interview where Chris Claremont was talking about the creative process behind the X-Men, and it's very obvious he had no clue where he was going to take these characters. He was just like writing it week by week, and it's really funny because Ann Nesenti and Louis Simonson were his editors, I believe, and he would come to them and he'd be like, "Hey, I don't know what to do," and they're like, "What about this plot thread you established 20 issues ago?" He's like, "Oh yeah, yeah," and then he just goes home and writes it. And that's why when you read it, it's so soap opera-esque, because it is a continuing story and it is building on plot threads, but it's not as premeditative as a lot of modern comics. I think an
Right.
author has an arc in mind and executes that arc and then moves on to the next thing, whereas Claremont is always building, he's always adding things, and maybe he gets a little too big for his britches at times. It's not perfect, and that's why I love this run so much, but it's not my favorite team book. Still, the way he's able to just like inject so much world building into these stories, where he could be writing issue 160 and then pull on a concept from issue 140 and then still have new readers understand what's going on, while having the people who have been reading from 20 issues ago be like, "Oh yeah, I'm so excited, this is finally happening."
Mhm.
It's a type of storytelling we don't see very often these days, and I think that's one of the most refreshing things about it. And like Brendan mentioned too, the team dynamics are incredible, dude. Like, I love the relationship of the X-Men. I love when Storm is the leader of the X-Men and Cyclops and her are like, they have this weird relationship. Storm is unsure of herself, Cyclops is unsure of himself, and they're kind of lifting each other up. You have these really great moments with Professor X and the entire team. Like, low-key, he wants to be the best leader he can, but he's got so much going on. He's also got the New Mutants he's dealing with, and it's a whole lot of stuff he's got to juggle. And I think when I think about the X-Men, I think about stuff like the Dark Phoenix saga because of the ramifications that story had. I think about something like God Loves, Man Kills because of how that graphic novel just took this concept and kind of solidified the mutant metaphor as something that is told in the form of a graphic novel. But what I come back to when I think about the X-Men isn't the specific arcs. It's not the conflicts. It's not the Sentinels. It's not, the Hellfire Club, the Brotherhood of Evil Mutants. What I think about is the team. I think about Cyclops. I think about Wolverine. I think about Storm. I think about Kitty. I think about Colossus. And I think about how all of these people bounce off each other. And I think about the conflicts they have, but also the love they have in their hearts for each other. And that is also something you seldom find in a lot of team books. I think team books these days especially are focused on the action. And that's why I do think this is such a great choice for like your favorite team book. Because is it the best book? No. Is it one of the best ensemble casts? Absolutely.
Brennan might have once again gotten the best pick.
Yes.
Like, Brennan is always picking something where it's like, at the end of the day, maybe Brennan has the most balanced choice.
What can I say? What can I say? I just got that. I don't know. I just got that ball knowledge, But I will say, there's something I wanted to bring up before we move on to the next choice here. Was what you were talking about, like Omnibus 1. Don't get me wrong, that definitely still stands out as like some phenomenal stories, and it's like you said, it is very episodic, and like you who also mentioned there, it is very much like a hodgepodge. Like at first, there's definitely not much of a plan there, but like it all does still tie together, which is it's phenomenal. But I was thinking of it from the perspective of like my favorite aspects of the stories when we're talking about like the team dynamic and the relationship. I feel like the first omnibus, while it is still phenomenal, as I said, I feel like Claremont was still getting an idea of how he wanted those dynamics to mesh and kind of weld together. Whereas in Omni 2, we get to see, I guess, the results of that first Omni and those dynamics fully grown. And there's just like getting to see the outcome and like the character growth and like the result of that, especially in like sections like, the Dark Phoenix saga and the Days of Future Past, it's an excellent payoff. And I think that's part of why I just always go back to it.
No, see, 100% agree with that point, because I think people often overlook the fact that like Claremont didn't write Giant Size X-Men. It was Len Wein who wrote Giant Size X-Men. And after I was watching this documentary and Len Wein was like, I can't write this. And they're like, who wants to write X-Men? And Claremont was just like in the offices. He was like an intern or like just got hired recently, like very fresh blood in the Marvel offices. And was just like, I want to write X-Men. And so he just did, right? He picked up after Giant Size X-Men and did this thing and like defined these characters. He had no clue what he was doing. And I think you could kind of feel that in the first Omni a little bit. He's learning who these characters are. He's trying to figure out their dynamics. He's trying to reinterpolate the Stan Lee stuff and make it feel fresh. And then he's got like like 6 new characters he's got to deal with as well. It's a lot to deal with, and Claremont does a fantastic job at it. But then by Omni 2, he's got his editors, he's got Louis Simonson, he's got Ann Nesenti in his corner. He's really locking in with the ideas. He's learning how to world build more, and I think that is why I think that stuff is more impactful for me personally. There's so many funny stories about like Jim Shooter too, like, and how much they butted heads. Like, a little fun tidbit: Jean Grey was never supposed to die. Claremont wanted to do a story where Jean Grey was going to kill all of these people, and then Jim Shooter was like, well, you can't have that, like, you need to have an ending. And Claremont's like, well, she'll just live. And he's like, nah, you got to figure something out. And then Claremont was like, well, what if we kill her? And then Jim Shooter was like, okay. But Claremont was bluffing. He didn't actually want to kill Jean Grey. And then Shooter was like, no, kill her. And Claremont was like, no, I don't want to. And he's like, well, I'm the editor, you're gonna kill her. Crazy. And apparently, like, I think it was Dave Cockrum like called Jim Shooter and was like screaming at him. He's like, what are you doing? Why are you making him do this?
Wasn't it John? Because John Byrne was really opposed to that.
It was John Byrne.
Yeah. So much so that I don't know if you guys have heard or know about this. John Byrne, for like the last, I want to say like 5 years, maybe longer, has been rewriting that era of X-Men, like post the Jean Grey death, as if she didn't die. And it got so big. It was like he has like this forum that he would do it on, like his own website. That's how you would read it. And he was drawing and writing it, but it was just pencils, no inks, not a finished product, right? So it'd be like listening to like a Pink Floyd album, but it's like one of the members, and it's just like the vocals or something, right? That's like what John Byrne was doing. It got so big. Marvel is officially producing it as a full finished product.
No way.
It's called X-Men Elsewhens or something. Uncanny X-Men Elsewhens or something like that.
Oh,
and it's like an actual physical book. Omar from Near Mint Condition announced it not too long ago or whatever, and I think John Byrne also like posted it. So yeah, John Byrne hated that idea so much that I think it's actually what drove him out.
Listen, I think him and Claremont also butted heads a little bit.
Yeah.
Here's the thing. John Byrne is a fantastic artist. I'm not reading that though. Yeah. I'm not reading. He's not. I don't think he's gonna be a good writer. But speaking of X-Men, I think we have a second X-Men pick in this list. Omnibus God, what is your favorite team book?
So we're talking about Claremont, aka Boremont, aka Snoozemont, aka Mont. So I decided, let's talk about a good writer. No, I'm just kidding. I'm trolling right now. But no, this was a really hard pick. I've read a lot of team books. I love the team dynamic. I'm more of a like solo guy. But when I think about a team, some of the most important teams in superhero comic books, and I got to do a little pump fake, guys. I know I told you guys, and I might have even shown on screen, Astonishing X-Men by Joss Whedon, which is a fantastic book. It was a top 5 read for me last year. But I'm going with Mark Millar and Brian Hitch's Ultimates.
No way.
And 2.
One and 2 is crazy.
Because I gotta be honest with myself, and I gotta be honest with the people.
My God.
For those that don't follow me or know me, at Omnibus God on YouTube or TikTok, this is who I am. I can't hide who I am anymore. Listen, let me preface this. Mark Millar is borderline a really shitty guy. He said some really shitty things. He's come up with some really shitty ideas. And he messes around a little too much with the Comicsgate folks. However, I'm a really big enjoyer of his books. And I remember being 10 years old, something like that, and seeing Ultimates, like the paperbacks, because at this point, they were reprinted, on the shelves at my comic book shop, and being wowed by the artwork and flipping through it and seeing this amazing artwork by Brian Hitch, one of my favorite artists of all time, and just being wowed. And then coming back to that book years later and reading it with all the discourse that you hear about the Ultimates books, how it's terrible, it's trash, it's edgy, it's edgelord comedy. And I was completely wowed by what Mark Millar did. Let me cook. Ultimates is a book from 2002, Ultimates 1, and then Ultimates 2 is 2003, I believe. This is in the Ultimate Universe, the original Ultimate Universe from the 2000s that started with Bendis on Ultimate Spider-Man, spawned off to a bunch of other titles. And this is basically the Ultimate Avengers. Like, this is the Ultimate Universe. This is version of Avengers. And what I love so much about this book is that it taps into that realistic approach of what if superheroes existed in the modern world. I think there's a lot of political commentary that kind of goes into like post 9/11, and there's a lot to say about how superheroes could be governed and who would run these governed superheroes and who would these governed superheroes be. I think a lot of people have problems with this Ultimates book because, like, again, it can be very edgy. I guess it's dated, whatever. Every other book is dated in all of comics. But these characters aren't your character. Like, this isn't Captain America from the 616. This isn't Hulk from 616. But I do think that Millar has a respect for research for these characters, to where horny Hulk makes sense if you read Hulk comics. I think the stories of the Ultimates having to band together, why they have to band together, and in that first, arc where it's like the Hulk, Bruce Banner, and how he's kind of a loser, I think that's intentional. I think that's what's supposed to happen. And I think the whole fact that the Hulk is this horny, nasty monster is the fact that in this universe, the Hulk brings out the worst of Bruce Banner. And it's this ugliness and nastiness that is just hidden deep down. It's like the worst of Bruce Banner, basically. And I like it because, again, you kind of have this moment where Bruce Banner's like, well, I took the formula because I thought the Ultimates needed a villain to fight. So it's like Millar's also setting these things up with a purpose, and it's like really entertaining and it's really fun. I love Iron Man's character because he's like dying, and he's like, I just want to help the world. I'm gonna do my best to do what I can, so when I die, like, I can leave something behind. So I like that about Iron Man. And there's just so many things I love about the Ultimates book. I don't know. I know you guys want to like start coming at my throat, but
I do have some things I want to say. So
But-
when you first told me how much you liked like this run, I was kind of like, I was taken aback a little bit. I'm not gonna lie, because my exposure to the Ultimates by Millar was just the like the commonly posted like panels that are all over TikTok, like Hulk horny and all that stuff. But then when I kind of sat with it, it is kind of like you said, like unfortunately, a horny Hulk kind of does make sense.
Right?
When you read Peter David's Hulk, you learn that Hulk is a representation of basically repressed emotions or repressed like psychological traits of Banner, right? And like, the most commonly explored one, the original explored one, was anger. But like, it's not so far-fetched to say that there are there's gonna be different aspects of that. Like when we read the Immortal Hulk, we get introduced to the Devil Hulk, right? And the Devil Hulk, in my opinion, is like this representation of like a version of Banner that that he needed, someone like almost like a father figure that would like love him for him. And it's basically like this part of himself that he's refused to really acknowledge. And in the Ultimates universe, it just so happens that this version of Banner, the repressed part happens to be the horny part. Now, am I saying that that's spectacular storytelling and writing that I totally rock with that? Not necessarily. I'm just saying when it comes from the perspective of like, if you've read a lot of Hulk comics, you can kind of understand the thought process that Millar had with that character, or at least with that take of the character. So, I surprisingly, I'm actually not going to dog on you. I'm going to sit in the Switzerland area here and be like, you know what? Maybe horny Hulk makes sense. Okay.
Well, and also like you talked about the Peter David run,
Mhm.
and in the Peter David run, there is like, so look, let me break it down real quick. Ultimate Hulk, horny Hulk,
Mhm.
is gray. And again, I think that's intentional because you go back to the Peter David run,
Yeah.
and Joe Fixit, who is this character that pops up after like this huge accident that happens, or it's not accident, this huge explosion that happens
Yeah.
due to the leader and stuff like that. he pops up in Vegas,
Yeah.
and it's the Gray Hulk, because at that point Hulk had been gray, and the
Mhm.
Hulk had been like not intelligent, but like he wasn't dumb. He wasn't like, you know, baby Hulk or whatever, like the
Yeah.
Savage Hulk. And then you get this character that's Joe Fixit, like this
Mhm.
mafia kind of bodyguard dude who, you know, works at a casino as a bodyguard, and he's a ladies' man. And you are constantly seeing him pick up chicks. You're constantly seeing him with a bunch of women. And there's even like this whole storyline where he's dating this girl, but she doesn't know that Bruce Banner is Hulk. And like there's this whole thing where she's trying to find Joe Fixit. Like Joe Fixit is famous in Vegas. People just think he's like this weird looking big guy, but he gets play. And it's because you also learn in the Peter David run, Bruce and his sexuality and like how Bruce was with sex was something that was like suppressed. And you have this
Exactly.
this story arc where he has a girlfriend who he's with for quite a bit.
Listen,
And
at the end of the day, even if sorry to interrupt, but even if it makes sense, right? Even if you can create this deep analysis in your head in order to justify this, you gotta read it and you gotta ask yourself: is this juvenile AF? Is this like written to be overtly edgy? Does it come across as childish? Put the panel on the screen right now. Hulk horny. Put the panel on the screen right now where Hulk's getting flashed.
It's
And
just
tell me, does it
Hulk horniest
analyze
there
it
is, dude.
all you want? You could come to any conclusion, but when you read the book, right? How many 17-year-old boys are going to be laughing and chuckling and not walking away with that same analysis you do? You guys are doing the lead work for Millar.
No.
You want to talk about the fact that like Hank Pym has a very deep and
Right, so hold on,
history
let
when
me-
it comes to domestic abuse, and then Mark Millar said, "Yeah, what if I make him spray the wasp with some bug spray?"
And then he gets
violent and
and then he
brutal,
gets
and then I'll make him
humiliated.
right?
He gets humiliated. He makes sure that
It's
you
gross. It's just
I
gross.
get
Even
it.
Even if it serves
But
the
it's an
story,
extreme
it's such
version.
a product of that 2000s era of like slapstick humor, but instead of like, you know, falling over, it's domestic abuse. Instead of like doing something like that, it's sexual assault. And sure, you could peel back the layers and have this like kind of fine dining experience where you're like, oh yeah, let's deconstruct it. But I guarantee you, right? Like 80% of the people reading that book were not deconstructing it. And the only reason you're deconstructing it is because you're a fan and you have to understand and analyze the book through the lens of the average audience goer. And you have to understand the impact that will have on the lens of the average viewer. This book was meant to introduce people to Marvel Comics. This
Hold
was
on, hold on.
supposed to be
Okay, hold
people's
on.
introduction. They're not analyzing it with your point of view.
That's not
Nah,
fair.
he
Okay,
why
go
is that
ahead.
not fair? He's cooking right now. That's entirely
No, I get it.
fair.
But like, at what point is it like I'm not the main character, guys? We are not the main characters. Like,
Right.
there are other people that read comics and are smart. I understand what
Mhm.
Yuhu's saying. He's totally valid in that. And that's why, here's what I'll say. Let me hold on. Let me just preface this real quick. This, I have always admitted, I completely understand that this is a guilty pleasure book.
Mhm.
I will never.
But just say that.
Okay, so it's a guilty pleasure book.
He did.
Hold on.
And then leave
anyone
it there. Leave it there.
And anyone who dislikes it, I do not debate people on whether or not it's a good book. I just tell people why I like it and why I think it's a good book. I think it's stuff like Ultimates 2 and how that's such a great Thor story.
I just feel like it's unfair to give this book as much credence as you're giving it, removing the context of like this is
But
a book.
it's
No,
there.
listen. This is a book made for new readers. The Ultimates project was made in the 2000s to get people to read comics who have
But
never read
it's
comics
also-
before.
It also has
There's
its
going to be
creative
so many
liberties.
people's first experience with these
That's
characters.
not fair.
You're
though.
analyzing this as someone who is a fan and has a deep understanding of the 616 Hulk, right?
There's a lot of people who
Oh,
also.
man.
I'm not the only. I'm not even close to the biggest Hulk. I love Hulk. I am a Hulk fan. I can say that. I've read a lot of Hulk comics, but I'm still not even close to the top of the Hulk fans, right? Like I can't. There's definitely people that know more ball than me when it comes to Hulk.
I would love to see the average, like the Hulk mega heads take on Ultimates Hulk. Because I feel like they're not gonna be rocking with it the way you are.
Well, then maybe I am the #1 Hulk fan, and maybe I am the smartest comic book fan of all time. But all right, let's move on. I should have just stuck with.
Well, no, hold on. Before we move on, I do have a question. Was it not Millar who made Scarlet Witch and Quicksilver have that incestual?
Yes, that's also Ultimates.
No, I mean it's again. Listen, okay, let me try to cap it off here. The point is that I think there has to be some sort of understanding that the book is supposed to be these characters that are not good, because the whole point is that if superheroes existed, it's I'm gonna say it. This is Millar's Watchmen. Nobody in the Watchmen are good characters. They're all terrible people. Nobody in the Ultimates are good characters. They're all terrible people. It's the same premise. And you know what? After talking to someone, I was talking to Owen Likes Comics. He made the comparison about how this is kind of Millar's version of the Authority. The Authority was closer to the Watchmen than Ultimates is. And I agree with that as well. But that's just what it is. If superheroes existed, more than likely, they would be pieces of shit. And this is Millar exploring that. But also there's great stuff like with Thor and Ultimates 2 and all the different captains and just the governing part of superheroes and what happens and when other nations feel like they need to catch up with America. There's a lot of commentary there on the military industrial complex, right? So why don't you like that stuff? That's your bag. But one Hulk horny and it's the worst book ever?
I think the cons outweigh the pros. They got the domestic abuse, you got the incestual brother-sister relationship, you got the
I'm not
all
right.
Hulk horny, right? And then you have Millar's like very, very shallow analysis of the military-industrial complex.
You haven't even talked about like their team dynamic at all, which is why we're supposed to be picking the book.
Exactly.
So what do you think about the Ultimates team dynamic, David? Go ahead.
Whatever. Okay, fine. The Ultimates team dynamic is probably not the best, but I think Yoo-Hoo has a pick for a team dynamic that I absolutely love. I actually think Yoo-Hoo's pick might actually be the best. When you're specifically talking about comic book series, Yoo-Hoo, what is your favorite comic book team series?
Yeah, as no surprise to anyone who knows me, I had to go with Doom Patrol by Grant Morrison. This book is just, I don't even know what to say about this book anymore, because every time I talk about it, I say the same
Neither
thing.
did Morrison.
I'm just gonna say the same thing I always say. But Doom Patrol is a book, I think it came out in the late 80s, early 90s, right off the heels of Morrison's Animal Man run. And the whole point of Doom Patrol was to take like a hodgepodge group of Silver Age characters and inject them into this crazy postmodern, post-crisis world. And Morrison did that to a degree in which like is just unfathomable. I just think the scope of like this crazy world is so like in your face, and it's so jarring, and it is confusing. I'm gonna be real. Morrison writes this book in a very confusing way. I've literally read an interview where Morrison talked about the fact that like they were trying to have characters talk gibberish, and so this is like back when computers first had like auto script, so you like type a little word and then it completes the word for you, and they would just type word like random characters and put them together in sentences of complete gibberish. Like Morrison was trying to make the kind of like backdrop of this Doom Patrol world really esoteric. And so that's very off-putting, but then the more you read it and the more you engage with it, the more it starts to make sense. I love this book because the team is just so wholesome. Their dynamic, in my opinion, is like unmatched compared to anything else in comics. This is a group of outcasts from society who are like kind of deformed like mutants, right? I think X-Men actually ripped off Doom Patrol, if I'm correct, right? Like that was the initial thing. And so like these guys, like you got Cliff, who's this like brain and a giant robot body, and he was this like NASCAR driver, and now he's just this like dude who's trapped in his own mind and can't feel anything. You have Crazy Jane, a girl who's got multiple personality disorder and bouncing between 1,000 different personalities. You got Larry, right? That's his name, Larry Rebus.
Rebus is the negative man together, but yeah, it's Larry.
It's Larry, and it's this guy who's got like two personalities inside of him, one of whom is Larry, and what's the lady's name?
I can't remember the lady.
But like it's like this like gender dysphoria where there's like two people inside him, but he's like, I am one person, right? Like I am Rebus, and it's such a fascinating case study into like the mind of dysphoria and how like personalities can like affect the way you interact with the world, but also reclaiming who you are despite some of the unconventional ways in which you choose to express yourself. They're outcasts from society, but like, yeah, it'd probably be hard for a robot man to walk around in society, but they don't love themselves. And I think that's what makes this team so interesting, is because like a lot of the mutants and X-Men were living like as human beings long before they had their powers, right? The Fantastic Four can walk around every day. The Avengers, a lot of the Avengers were civilians before they were superheroes. These guys hate themselves. They can't find it in themselves to be strong and powerful and like, functioning members of civil society. But then when you put them together, they can call each other out in ways that like they never experienced before. Because yeah, dude, I got multiple personality disorder, but who am I to tell a robot, right, who's just got a brain in his skull, that like you don't know what it's like to be me, when he can't feel the blades of grass on his fingers, right? And it's like they match each other, they bring out the best in each other, they call each other out, and by the end of the book they love each other. And there's a really beautiful page at the end of the book with Cliff and Crazy Jane where they're just like looking at this beautiful world. And I think that panel speaks to like just the power of this cast and the love they have for each other, not just as a team, but as like a family unit, a found family. And just thinking about it, makes me want to tear up. I just love what they bring out of each other. And then you add Morrison's crazy, esoteric, hard to understand world, and it gives the book a lot of rereadability. And even when you're lost and confused and you don't know what's going on, you still have these characters. And I think that's what keeps me coming back to it. Is like, I don't know what the hell Morrison's talking about, but I know that Crazy Jane and Cliff are going to have this dynamic. I know Larry and whoever are going to be talking to each other in some type of way. And that's what keeps you engaged, in my opinion.
Yeah, I love Doom Patrol so much. I think when it comes to Morrison works, it's definitely one of those books that leans a lot into like Morrison and how wacky they are. And it's something that works where it's like I think of something like the JLA run by Morrison and how much I am not a fan of that run. And a lot of the reasons that I don't like that run coincidentally can also be found in the Doom Patrol run, but it works better in Doom Patrol. And I don't know if it's because of the cast of characters, more than likely it is because of that, or I don't know if it's because Morrison went at a different approach with these characters, but the randomness of it all, the wackiness of it all, it's just on brand. And Morrison tells you that through these characters, where the whole point of the Doom Patrol, at least during their run, another thing too is like this run is a really good jumping on point for these characters, because the Doom Patrol is
they give you the introduction of every single character.
Yeah, it's like the Doom Patrol is like a Silver Age concept. So they've been around for decades at this point. But you get this story where you have this quote where someone's basically saying like what the Doom Patrol will take care of is all the stuff, like the behind the scenes stuff that like all the stuff that can't be explained. That's what the Doom Patrol is going to take care of. That's what they tackle. And I love that, because that kind of gives Morrison an out to just be like, oh, it doesn't really make any sense, but it's going to work either way because I've got to do it. The Justice League can't make sense in this story, but the Doom Patrol is a perfect fit. So I love that, because it's creative. It technically, I guess, doesn't make sense, but for Morrison's writing style and narratively, it just works. And it's a beautiful story. I love this pick. And I think it has a lot to say about really just representation with everybody and like the experience that a lot of people have. And I don't want to get too far, because I'm not someone who's a part of the LGBTQ community and I'm not queer, but I think speaking with mutuals who are a part of these communities, this is a really great, ahead of its time representations for the queer experience, whether it is for trans folks, gay folks. There's a lot that Morrison was just touching on that is so in your face that it really like it makes you think of like how those like comic gates people and like right-wing conservatives and all that stuff, ultimately how they just want to say things like comics are going woke now, comics are gay now, everybody's turning gay now, but you had a run like Doom Patrol that was doing well, it was selling well, it was going on for a very long time, and it was being written by a very respectable author that at that point had written a lot of critically acclaimed works and sold a lot of comics too. Editing omnibus here real quick, this might seem a little bit jarring, but we kind of got really sidetracked after this part of the conversation, and we're just kind of talking for 30 minutes about stuff that we were kind of already talking about. So it's going to seem a little weird, but we're going to move into the Hoxpox talk. So here we go. We talked about how we all picked a book to read. We picked Hoxpox by Jonathan Hickman and Pepe Larraz. They forced me to read this book, reread this book, even though I read this book 3 months ago. But we should have some good conversation because this is the first time that Chris and Brendan read the book Decent XP.
Yeah.
I will say this is like my favorite comic of all time, or like one of my favorite. This is like a 5 out of 5 star read for me.
I feel like every episode you lie about what your favorite comic is. Like you're always saying something else, and I'm like, I have to remind you, it's Animal Man.
But it's what I said, one of my favorite comics of all time. I really enjoy this book, and so I'm really curious. I guess we could start with Decent and then move on to Chris. What was y'all's like, I guess, assumption of what this book would be? What was this book, and like how does that kind of relate to your expectation of like what it delivered?
So going into it, I didn't really know a lot about Hoxpox. All I really knew is it's what led to the Krakoa era, right? So obviously I expected some kind of like setup for Krakoa, maybe some background explanation for like how that came to be. And I'd also heard that like people consider Krakoa like a vast misinterpretation of Xavier's character, or at least like a really different kind of take on his character. I disagree personally. I didn't see it that way. Yeah, I didn't have any like expectations beyond that. I was just kind of going in there with an open mind, being like, okay, let's see what this is all about. I've heard so much about this era of X-Men. Like I've only read Claremont's, so I want to see what it's all about. And going into what it actually was, the main word I would have to say is a tad bit confusing. It was really enjoyable, though. I will say that. I give Hawks itself a 5 out of 5 and Pox a 4 out of 5. I think
Hawks and Pox. I love that.
well, because I was rating the issues individually as I was reading them, and I noticed, I'm like, wow, all of the House of X issues, I'm giving 5 out of 5s here. And then the Power of X, like there was one that was 5, and the other one was like 4.5. So I'd say like 4.5 for Powers of X. And I think mainly that was because with Powers of X, I felt like it did confuse me a little bit. Like I was kind of like, wait, there's multiple X-1000 timelines or whatever, like, because you're going through the different lives, right, of Moira, and kind of seeing how we got to the point where Krakoa got to where it is.
I guess a little bit of a spoiler warning and a little bit of context if you haven't read Hoxpox. The whole pitch is that they retcon Moira, so now that she's a mutant, and so in this story, her mutant power is that every time she dies, she's reincarnated with the knowledge she has from her previous lives. So what Brendan is referring to is that as we go down this timeline, we see the 10 different lives of Moira that ultimately leads us to the 616 status quo we have right now, where she's been a mutant this entire time and she's lived these 10 different lives, and this is what we're watching happen in real time, her figuring out like how do I do this, because every time something horrible happens, right, it ends up blowing up and the world is a terrible place, and she's trying to fix that and be like, yo, what do we do?
But I found that it was a really interesting take, right? Because obviously throughout the history of the X-Men, the X-Men's always striving for this ultimate goal, like this dream that Xavier has, right? About a world where both mutant and mankind can live alongside each other. And, I think with how long X-Men stories have been going on and that's still not having been achieved, it makes sense the next logical step is a situation where Xavier says, yeah, you know what? Fuck that. We're actually not going to live side by side with these people. We're going to take it all because it belongs to us in the first place. We're the next stage of human evolution. And I thought that was really interesting. And I know a lot of people were like, no, Xavier wouldn't do that. Xavier is a nice guy. No, he's not. Xavier is actually a bit of an asshole. Like, you got to read the stories to understand it. But like, I feel like this is very much in character for him. You get like this version of him where he has like this dream. But if spoilers, obviously, he sees into Moira's mind and sees all the ways the X-Men have failed and the way that his dream never gets accomplished. The fact that the X-Men always lose, right? And he says, you know what? Yeah, obviously the approach I was planning to take, the approaches these other versions of me have taken, just did not work. So it's time for something completely new. And I thoroughly enjoyed that because it does respect and still tie into the previous runs that came before it, but it brings in something very unique at the same time. So I honestly, I haven't enjoyed most of the stuff I've read from Hickman, but I actually thoroughly enjoyed this. And it has opened my eyes to maybe reading some more Hickman stories.
No, dude, I'm glad you brought up that. So there's a scene where Moira meets like the current 616 status quo Professor X at a park, and he's just sitting there
Mhm.
smiling, taking in this little like fair that's going on. And Moira's like, "Oh yeah, I like." She's talking to him like she knows him, and he's like, "Do I know you?" And that's the moment she's like, "Why don't you take a look, Xavier?" And so he looks into her mind, and he sees these different timelines where every single time, right, mutants get enslaved, they get exterminated, and like these horrible things happen. And it's this beautiful panel where he like puts his mind up, and she's like looking at him, and he just goes, "Oh." And whenever I think about Hoxpox, that panel is just printed into the back of my mind. It's such like a simple moment, but it's so powerful because you know the context of like how many different times these X-Men and mutants have failed. And so like seeing like Charles just take this all in and realize like, dang, every single time we fail. It's just like, it's so good. It's so good.
I am pretty familiar with the Krakoan era. I was reading books at the time that it came out and even before, so I remember the era really, really well and like the feel at the time, but I had never read this story. So the only thing that I knew was basically it's a seminal work from Jonathan Hickman, and it kickstarted what I would argue is probably the most important X-Men era to date. And it was fantastic. It met my expectations and exceeded them. There was a moment when I was on like issue maybe 3 or 4, and I thought, why did we pick this as the team book? I'm not really sure this is the way to go. But then spoilers for those who haven't read it, once you get to like what is it, like 8 and 9 when the team dies and is reborn, and they kind of show they like show the mutants. They're like, oh, I know that this is my brother, like I know her, this is my sister. I was like, yeah, okay, yeah, like I do know them, all right. Like, and it really was just kind of this incredible story that really wraps you up in the world of mutantdom.
Yeah, no, that moment was so incredible. I wrote that down too, because basically what happens is that in the current timeline, they realize that there's this project called Sword. And so it's this space station in the sky, and they're building a mother mold. And this mother mold is eventually what will lead to the creation of Nimrod, I believe, which leads to like further developments of AI, in which eventually like all of humanity and mutant kind go extinct. And so, because they have all this knowledge from Moira's previous timeline. So the X-Men are sent on a mission to go to this like space station and like destroy the mother mold like blueprints basically. And it fails. Every single one of them dies on the space station. And it's like one of like, you read this book for the first time and you're like, oh my God, they're all dead. And then right after that, you get revealed Krakoa has mastered the art of resurrection. They take all of the I really love the way Hickman does this too, is he takes all of these different mutants that have these different powers. So there's this person that can like manipulate flesh, and there's this person that can like create life, and then there's Professor X with his like mind abilities, and they take these crystals that can like store the memory databases of mutants, and they bring all of these mutants together, and they have them form this kind of like resurrection squad where they put their powers together to birth like basically like a blank slate copy of this person. And then Professor X takes the memories from this crystal and puts it into the minds of these like reborn, I guess like at that point they would just be like cadavers, but not then once you put the memory in their mind, they become who they were before they died. And then right, you watch the X-Men die, you learn about this resurrection, and then like what Chris says, you get that moment where like Professor X is floating and he's holding his hand out, and Cyclops is like naked, dragging himself on the ground, and he's just smiling like, to me, my X-Men. That's like one of the most iconic X-Men panels of all time, I think. And oh, it's so good. So good. David, how was the reread for you? You look a little bored.
I'm done. No. You guys are just cooking. I'm just listening to some good conversation right now, basically. But yeah, I agree. I think for me, I had put off Hoxpox for so long. I like I mentioned, I reread it for the book club, but I actually read it for the first time like 3-4 months ago, and
Wow.
I had put it off for such a long time because I was so intimidated by how different this era of X-Men was. So like at the point that I got Hoxpox in my collection, I had the deluxe cover, the deluxe edition. uh, when I got that, I think Krakoa was already like a few years in. You know, it was kind of towards the end. Like at that point, Hickman had already left. So I already knew the most basic surface level things that Krakoa had to offer. And, you know, through like conversation and discourse that the comic book community was having about it. And it was just so different from what I knew the X-Men to be. I haven't read a ton of X-Men comics, but I've read a good chunk of the Claremont run, or I've read like the beginning chunk of the Claremont run, and I've read the Stanley and Jack Kirby run, and also like you know Roy Thomas with others and stuff like that. So the X-Men that I know, the X-Men that I knew at that point was so different from the X-Men that we get in Hoxpox specifically, and then what I can assume is eventually the Krakoa era itself. I haven't read it yet. I do have the Omni, and I'm really excited to get into the Dawn of X content. And it is genuinely one of my favorite comics of all time, Hoxpox, because of how innovative Hickman was able to be, how true he played to the X-Men characters. Like, I think of that. I think the resurrection issue is such a iconic issue. I think the imagery that you who just described is very iconic. It gets brought up a lot. A lot of people share it online, and it's because it is the next step of X-Men. I think of stuff like, oh, I have read Morrison's X-Men run as well before this, and I think of stuff like Morrison's X-Men run and how X-Men does how Morrison does the whole secondary mutation, and it's things like that where it's like kind of pushing the X-Men characters a little bit forward. That's what the way Hickman did it though, was like pushing the characters not just one step forward, but like almost picking the characters up and just lunging them multiple steps ahead. It's like, you know, like on the Monopoly board, like you're cheating and you're only supposed to move one stop ahead, but you like just zoom your piece around the board. That's what Hickman did for X-Men, it seemed like. And it's beautiful. It's beautifully done. You think of the moment with the resurrection and how Storm is telling you about these characters as she's like saying, I know this is my brother because, and Storm is describing to you, the reader, the type of characters these characters are. Scott, Jean, Logan.
I think when Scott gets resurrected, she's like, how do you know me? And I think Scott says something along the lines of, he's like, I didn't know how to be a leader and you taught me.
Yeah.
She looks at the crowd and she goes, I know him. This is my brother.
Exactly.
And it's like it's calling back to that like beauty, like Brendan and I were talking about earlier with the Claremont days, where it's like these people have so much history with each other. So if you know that and you see this moment, you're like, wow. But if you don't know that, right, you could still jump.
It's still a beautiful moment,
and it's such a great moment because there's the unity of the Krakoan people. These mutants for the first time standing in this land, understanding they have this resurrection. They have the ability to live this life. They're free. They're together for the first time, and they're celebrating the success of this mission. It's like, gosh, it's so beautiful.
I just wanted to say, I think also like that page or that story also has a couple different meanings behind it, right? There's obviously like that familial aspect, you know, like really hearkening back to the relationships that these characters have. But I think it also tries to address the reader who might go, but are these really like Cyclops? Is this really, you know, after they've been reborn and died, like, is this really the characters that I know and love? Right? Because I mean, that was the first thought I had was, okay, if these characters are getting reborn, like, how do we know? Like kind of a Ship of Theseus scenario, you know? It's like, how do we really know that these are the characters that like we've read previously? You know, like could these, you know, end up being not the characters that we know and love? And Hickman directly addresses that by being like, look at this, like these are the characters. It's literally said, I know this person, this is my brother, this, you know, this is my sister. These are the people you know and love. And another thing I will say about Hoxpox, and you know, I didn't want to have to say this You who I think you're gonna have the biggest smile on your damn face, and I'll probably never hear the end of it, man. But I low-key came to appreciate the data pages.
No, if there's any Jonathan Hickman pages that are more useless, it's these, because literally
There's too many.
Jonathan. Well, first of all, there's a shit ton, but I hate it when it doesn't add anything.
Well,
The data pages are just Jonathan Hickman hand holding all the people that like
No.
can't understand the story narratively.
No, I can't
You
believe
would
I'm doing this.
literally-
I'm defending this.
No, dude. You would literally read. Hold on. You would literally read a data page that again breaks down like how the mutants are being resurrected.
Mhm.
It's telling you which mutant has the power of making the eggs and
Mhm.
which mutant blah blah blah. So he'll write that in a data page, only for you to flip the page and
And have it-
Xavier
No, you're wrong.
through
You
dialogue.
save your breath. I got you, bro. No,
And-
you're
no. And Xavier, through the dialogue, describes these characters and
Yeah.
what their powers can do, while
Okay.
Pepe Larraz is drawing it happen.
No.
That is meaningless data pages.
No. I have two examples that
most-
counteract
nah.
that completely.
The most interesting one that isn't fully spelled out is probably like the Moira timeline one. That's like the only
Yeah,
one where I was
that's
like,
the only-
damn, this is
Oh,
crazy.
I got
Like,
two more for you, though. I got two more for you. So
What are
yeah,
they?
All right,
things
go
that
ahead.
aren't explained directly on the next page. The Moira timeline, the Krakoan alphabet. All right, that they allude
That's
to the
bullshit, bro. You
what are
can't
you?
even understand
What are you?
either
4 years
way.
old? Excited at the alphabet? What the?
Bro, the first thing I did when I saw that data page about the Krakoan alphabet was I went back to see what
No,
the
you didn't.
words were
know
above.
what you're
Yes,
about to
I
say.
did.
No, you didn't.
I
You're such a
literally went
fucking
back and
liar.
because there's 2 points where you see the Krakoan alphabet prior to. It's above.
There's a
the
ton of
drug-
times where you see the. Or sorry, go ahead. Go ahead.
There's the drugs and their labels, which I was excited to see what it was. It ended up just being literally the letters, and then you have the doorways that have the labeling. So that's just one.
That part is super dumb too. The data page with the drugs and the labels, because the page right before is the guy standing around being like, "Hey, so they're trying to export drugs to us. Did you know that they do this, this, and this?" It's like, what are we doing here, bro? Why do you need to
Yeah.
give me a diagram?
I think
Bro,
there's a lot of other data pages too. Like I think there's always this like pressing threat about like what technology will become, especially when you get
Mhm.
to
He
the
explains that.
X1000 timeline. There is no direct explanation
Yes,
of
there
like what this ever-present transcendental phallic AI is, but Hickman laying it out, being like, this is the first stage, the second stage, the third stage, the
He
fourth
does
stage,
it through the
fifth stage.
story too. What are you
He
talking?
does do it in the story.
And
Okay,
then
but-
another data page though that I think is really
He
cool.
just ignores it.
You know what these are? These are notes that Hickman wrote to himself so he wouldn't forget, and he forgot to take them out when he handed in the script to the editor.
Listen, real
No.
quick. I'm not saying like this is more to praise Hickman. It's like Hickman is smart and the writing in here is perfect to the point
Mhm.
where Hickman is explaining these things to the reader narratively through the book, and Pepe is beautifully illustrating these things to the reader.
Mhm.
So the fact that then Hickman wants to do a data page where he's just writing it down in
But
a
it's-
undoubtedly less interesting way. What do you think is more interesting? Pepe Larraz's amazing artwork or a blank piece of paper with digitalized
I'm
font
sorry.
describing what we just saw in the art?
So your suggestion for explaining the Krakoan alphabet is to have Cyclops go, "This is the letter A.
No,
this is
that's
the
not.
letter B."
That's the one example you have, and
I
you
have
are-
more.
The only thing that does is let you read the writing that's on the wall in the book, but in the
They already
story,
tell you
in
what
the
it means, by the
exactly,
way.
exactly.
Okay, no, they don't explain the scenes. They explain the fact
Chris
that it is
just
their
gave you an
own.
example.
No, it is. They
the
explain the
medicine.
fact that it is their language that they know natively, and
Hmm.
then the ambassadors from the other nations that are there, they try to explain it away as gibberish, which I think is also Hickman trying to kind of comment on the fact that like a lot of let's make a comparison with the American politics and stuff like that, and just the idea that they have this affinity for saying English only, like if someone speaks in another language, they'll just say, oh, they're just, they're speaking gibberish, whatever, or why aren't they speaking in English? I think that's a perfect example right there with with the Krakoan alphabet and the language itself, and they don't give you the translation. They just say that is for us to know, not for you to know.
Brendan,
I think another example of like a really cool data page that definitely isn't explained is when they talk about the relationship Krakoa has with other nation states. And so there's like a page of states who aren't allied with Krakoa, and they have the reasons these states aren't allied with Krakoa. So it has like, Israel, and it says reason ideological. It has like Wakanda, and it says reason Wakanda has no need for Krakoan drugs, right?
Yeah, that one I love.
Like there was
that's after they go to vote at the UN, I think.
Yeah, like a data page like that. You're telling me you read that, and you're like you get told explicitly the socio-political context of what Krakoa exists.
You named one out of how many though?
There's a lot that don't do anything, dude.
I can give you another one. I can give you another one right now.
Tell me what purpose the diagram that shows where Nimrod is orbiting. Do you know the one I'm talking about? It's like the space diagram that shows like where Nimrod is orbiting. What does that do in the story besides tell you where he is?
What does
that do for you?
And in the book.
Exactly. Like
I'll admit this. I do feel like at a certain extent the data pages can be a little bit excessive. Maybe they do. I don't think they baby the reader at all. Like
no.
I'm definitely over exaggerating when I say that.
But there are definitely moments where I'm like, okay, I didn't feel like that needed to be explained. But I would feel like a majority of the time the data pages serve a good purpose. Like when Hickman explores the idea of like Omega level mutants existing with specific powers. So you have like mutants that are Omega in terms of telekinesis, but not Omega in terms of their other ability, and like exploring the relation between the different levels of a hive mind and how that eventually becomes like this black hole.
I think I'm really glad Brendan is saying this because I think it also speaks to the fact that like this is a book that is very confusing on your first read, especially because of all of the different timelines you're playing around with.
Yeah.
If you're an X-Men fan or if you've never read an X-Men comic before, there are going to be moments in this book where you take a pause and you read the story, and especially because the story is told in a non-linear way, it's going to be hard to like I could see people having difficulties understanding this, and I think the data pages serve as a way to kind of like soften the entry gap for readers because like yeah, dude, there's a lot of information and a lot of concepts that are being established in here that are going to be hard to pick up on, especially considering like how expansive this book is in terms of scope. It's establishing the nation state of Krakoa. It's establishing the trade relationship of Krakoa. It's redefining mutants like presence in the world. It's redefining what the evolution of AI technology means for the status quo of mutants. It's giving you 10 different timelines for Moira. And in those 10 different timelines, there's also multiple sci-fi concepts that play into the fact that like in different realities, different things can aspire. You know what I mean? Like there's a lot happening in this book. And you know what? If you're smart enough to pick up on the subtext and you don't need your hand held, I can respect the fact that like you can just skip a data page. But if you're someone who like really, really wants to have a full holistic understanding of this book, I think that's where the data pages serve their purpose perfectly, right?
Yeah.
Okay, that's fair.
I like how you clean that up. Yeah. I would say it's akin to like Stanley dialogue. So that's great. We can kind of get off.
Yeah. I did want to talk about this really quick is that I like how this book it uses previous continuity, but it doesn't rely on it. I think there's only like 1 or 2 pages where it's hella like, remember all the shit the X-Men did? But what I really like about this book is that it finds different ways to pay respect and homage to the X-Men's history and like their characters and who they are. But it also does something that I think is hella crazy. You guys can tell me if I'm cooking or not. It pays homage to stories that haven't even been told yet. It has like, even though it's like really sad, I feel like it has this outlook where it's like, the X-Men are going to keep fighting this never-ending battle. They're probably never going to succeed and get to the place they want to be, but they're going to endure. And that's the most interesting thing about it, right? Is the X-Men will endure, and they're going to fight however many years into the future for themselves, like for their rights. And I think that's really cool.
You're cooking.
That's it. Yeah, I love that point.
To like kind of spitball off of that, I also just think rereading this book, I haven't read all of Krakoa. I've read Krakoa up to Hickman's Inferno, but it's so cool to see how ambitious this book is, and when it actually plays out, there's so many plot threads established in this book that you see in Krakoa, and I know that happens post Hickman's Krakoa as well. Like you have Sinister and his breeding program, right? You have like Sword, which becomes an Al Ewing series. You have obviously like just the nation state of Krakoa in itself. You have the fact that like the Quiet Council becomes like a major thing, and the politic makeup of the Quiet Council, right? Like every single thing Hickman does in this book to shape the new status quo gets built upon by Hickman or other authors. And it's very seldom you see something this ambitious get seen out to fruition. And I think that's another reason why I love this book, because it's not a story that's filled with false promises. And I think that happens a lot in the comic book industry, especially at Marvel. They give you something awesome, and then they blue ball you. Hickman doesn't do that.
Rug
Right.
pull, dude.
And that'll do it for episode 3 of Crash Out Comics. Thanks so much, everybody, for joining and listening. Again, let us know down below any feedback you might have. Let us know your thoughts about everything that we talked about. We would love to have a section where we can kind of just talk about viewer comments throughout all the platforms and kind of get some conversations going through there. We'll see you guys in episode 4. Have a good one.